So I was asked to talk this afternoon about why would you guys want to regenerate your farm? Why? If you don't understand that, there's no point even talking about it. Okay? We have to understand the why. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how you do it. And then depending on how long-winded I get up here and if there's any questions or not, I may share a few examples of different things that people have done. So first of all, a definition for you. Everybody says, what does regenerative mean? So there's three types of agriculture. There's degenerative agriculture, which about 98% of us practice. It's not a very nice word to say, but it's true. Then we have sustainable agriculture, and then we have regenerative agriculture. So what these little graphs here mean is soil health, soil organic matter, various things. So the degenerative model, it's slowly working its way down. Then we get to the bottom of the toilet bowl and we say, whoops, that's not very good. So we stay down in the bottom of the toilet bowl, but we don't go any deeper. That's sustainable. And then we say, well, this is really stupid. Why would we want to stay down there? Let's work our way back out. Let's start to rebuild agriculture. That then becomes regenerative. So that's the definitions. Okay? So I'm going to give you 5 reasons why you should regenerate. So the first one is soil degradation, as I just very briefly described. Next one. So there's 100+ years of agriculture on my particular farm. My grandfather started way back in the early days. So every single screw up on that farm is directly related to either my son, myself, my dad, or my grandfather. We can relate it right back. So in those 100-odd years, we took organic matter from 12% is what it was at settlement to 2% 25 years ago when I started to get regenerative in my approach to it. That's pretty impressive. 107 years, or I wasn't quite 100 years, but at the point where I changed 20 years ago. We took it from 12 to 2. That can't go on forever. You can't continue to degenerate and feed the world. It won't happen. Salinity was increasing. We were losing nutrient density in the food we produced, and we were losing biodiversity. So, keep going. Oh, back one there. So, this is a slow process, guys. Ladies, sorry. It's insidious. So, if we were out on one of your fields and we went for a walk on it, and the next day there was a little bit of a windstorm, and we went back the day after and looked, there isn't one of us in this room could say with the soil moved. There's probably evidence we would see. But when you think about soil loss, one of these sheets of paper is 1 ton per acre. The thickness of that sheet of paper, that is 1 ton of soil. And we can't see that visually. So you lost a ton this year, next year maybe you had a big windstorm again, or you had water erosion, whatever, you lost another 2-3 ton, whatever it is. And on it goes over the 100 years, and pretty soon we've worked ourselves a long ways down. So the average soil, farm soil, loses 4 tons per acre per year. That's the statistic. Now, maybe some of you guys are good farmers, and when I ask this question, every one of us puts up our hand and says we're all good farmers. That's true, but we're still losing soil. And so somehow we have to make our bit of a mind shift to change that. In 2015, the United Nations declared that year as the year of the soil. And as part of that particular event, there was an international conference of soil scientists. All of the gurus of soil science in the world went to this conference. And one of the statements that came out of that conference was that at the current rate of soil degradation in the world, there is less than 60 harvests. So that was 7 years ago. So that means we're down to 53 harvests now. So this isn't really a good news story. This isn't the lake you're looking at. This is southern Manitoba. Picture was taken in June 2021. There's about 8 inches of soil there on that graph. So this happens every single day. One of the joys that I have is I know the country reasonably well from here to west of York, and I travel real regular doing this project. And it is absolutely incredible what you see when you look out the window. So just another picture, southern Manitoba again. You can see the salinity there. Huge, huge issue in some areas. I would suggest to you on the left-hand side, that particular farmer probably has between 35 and 40% of that land severely degraded. There's zero production on it, zero. On the right-hand side, that's a road down the middle, a municipal road. On the right-hand side, exactly the same soil, same everything, but the guy is in a regenerative mode, and he is doing a pretty darn good job of controlling that salinity. You can still see there's little woopsies here and there where he hasn't quite got it fixed yet, but he's doing a really good job of making that salinity go away. So, 10,000 years ago, our ancestors got tired of chasing game around. And they decided to settle down and start growing food. Instead of chasing it, they decided to grow it. So things like, and they went into an area called the Fertile Crescent, which is present-day Iran and Iraq. That's where agriculture began. And they domesticated things like this: sheep, pigs, cows. They found things like lentils, flax, wheat, and barley. But they found the wild plants. They began to select seeds, and over the thousands of years of selection, we recognized the varieties that we would grow today. But over that time, those 10,000 years of agriculture, we had this happen. We were degenerating our soil. This picture is actually taken in Iraq, in the Fertile Crescent. Now, if I was looking for a place to start grain farming, this wouldn't be the place I would choose right now. It's pretty degraded. It's way down there. Now, the good news story is that we have learned over the last 20, 30, 40 years, there isn't a single landscape in the world that can't be fixed with regenerative agriculture. So if the right management was applied to this land, it might take 100 years, it might take 500 years, I don't know, but we could take it back to where it was with some work. That's the good news story. Okay. So when we look at this worldwide, this isn't a problem that's only happening here in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. You can see those red circles across our globe. Huge, huge areas are desertifying because of agriculture. Huge. And you know, at the bottom, it says 1/3 of the farmland has been lost in the last 40 years. The other interesting thing is when you throw in the climate change thing, we have lost 50% of the photosynthetic capacity of the earth with this process of desertification. And so you were probably taught in high school that this right here is the Sahara Desert, which is the largest desert in the world. But probably what you weren't taught is that's a man-made desert. That's not a natural desert. If you go back and start reading Greek, you can read about Homer's Iliad. You can actually read about Homer talking about walking across North Africa and never setting foot in sunlight. It was totally forested. And you can actually read the ancient history of how it was deforested, then farmed in a very arid climate, and then it became a desert by our actions as agriculture. So that's one fairly good reason, in my opinion, to look at regeneration. So the second one is nutrient density. So we eat food. We just had a meal here. We need it for calories, stuff like that. But we also need it for minerals. And so what happens when you get to be my age, if you've been eating a nutrient deficient diet for a long time, all of a sudden you get cancer, you get diabetes, or you need to have your knee replaced, your hip replaced. My grandparents, when I remember my grandparents in that age group, maybe the technology wasn't there, but they weren't complaining about sore knees and sore hips and stuff like that. Whereas my generation, that's what everybody talks about now. Have you had your hips done yet, or your knees done, or your shoulders? If you look at your budget, you're spending 50% of every single tax dollar that you contribute to the government of Manitoba is going for healthcare. Every single 50% of every dollar. And part of the reason is because the food that we produce doesn't have nutrients in it anymore. And so just to share, you know, if we look at 1940 to 91, so that's 50 years of data there on vegetables. If you look at, say, something common like sodium, 49% less, fruits, 29% less, meats, 24% less, dairy, 47. Go down here to say iron, 27% less iron, 24%, 50%, 83%. You know, you can read them. Some are higher, but most are generally lower. And there's a reason for that. It's because our plants aren't functioning properly because of the way we do agriculture. So if we want to get a healthier population, we need to change the way we do agriculture. So, third reason, federal regulation. So this is the realities of life. And we've all known about climate change for at least 60 years, maybe 70 years now. It's not anything new. And we've always had targets. And we come to the year 2000 or 1995 or 2010, whatever, we're going to reach this target. We never even came close. We just, life keeps on going. Everything's cool. We don't even worry about it. However, we are now in a new reality. Most of the countries in the world have now enacted legislation that says that thou will be, by 2030, we will have achieved this level of reduction. This is new, something brand new. So you say, okay, big deal. We've got legislation. We don't move the life on. Because also Australia has done this. New Zealand has done this. The United States is in the process of doing this. What will happen in 2032? We'll be busy selling beef or canola or whatever it is to China, Vietnam, wherever it is in Southeastern Asia. And the Australians will take a look at that and say, how come are them damn Canadians doing so much business? And so they'll start looking at our emission records and they'll say, well, damn. Then they will take us to the GATT court, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, and they will win their case. Our goods will be tariffed. The deemed cost of those emission reductions, and we will lose big time. Huge. This is the new reality we're in, guys, whether we like it or not. This is how the world will start to function after 2030. And so my advice to you would be, learn how to regenerate now. It's much better to do it now than to have the federal government tell you how to. And one of the reasons that you're seeing funding, you've been paying attention, groups like what Nermel runs here, what you guys are part of, the watersheds, are all receiving an awful lot of money right now to do things like cover cropping, grazing, better grazing management, nitrogen reduction, all those kind of things are because of this new reality. Okay, next one. So that's the third reason. The fourth reason is one I really like, profit. I'm a big believer in making money. Okay. So here we have a graph of 90 years of farm income. And you can see it's going up, start at 10 billion in 26 to over 60 billion by 16. You know, nice big numbers. Keep getting bigger and bigger all the time, even higher yet if we had the recent data. The interesting one is the green one. That's our net. You can see, you know, from 26 up until about 80, 86 maybe, there was net. We had net. We put 20, 30 cents. If we sold a load of cattle, we got 30 cents to put in here. If we sold a load of canola, we got 20 or 30 cents to put in here. It was all good. We were making money. But starting somewhere around in that late 70s, early 80s, the game changed. You can see the net almost goes to zero. In fact, for a few years there, it was net zero. And it hasn't changed a whole lot in the last few years. So what the heck is happening? So what's happening is that as our soil began to decline somewhere way back here, up until this point here, we were basically growing crops with no inputs. Our soil was, we had some of the richest soil in the world in the western, northern Great Plains. We had some of the richest soil in the world. And we were able to grow stuff with basically no input for about the first 70 years of agriculture. When I started farming, using fertilizer was extremely rare. It came in bags. I remember carting bloody truckloads of bags of phosphorus out of a rail car onto a 3-ton truck, hauling it home, putting it in the shed, loading it back up, hauling it out to the field. You didn't tend to use very many tons an acre, I'll tell you, when you did that. That's the way it was. And it was rare. It wasn't common yet back then. And so, but since that time, as our soil health has gone down, we've needed to put more and more and more synthetic inputs. And if you just think back in your own farming careers, you've probably increased your nitrogen rates by quite a lot in the last 20 years from when you started. And it's because as our soil health goes down, we've substituted with artificial inputs from petroleum. Yeah. The consequence of that, of course, is we've given up 20, 25% of our net profit. It's gone now. So what regenerative agriculture does then is it turns that around, and we start to make the biology work again, so we don't need to buy as many synthetic inputs. That makes it more profitable. Next one. Oh, good. Got tired already. So our last one then, our last point I'm going to give today is a sense of well-being. So there's a picture of my wife and our 4 grandchildren. And a sense of well-being, it's a hard one to describe, but I know a great many people that I work with that have been regenerating their farms for a number of years. They all have that. And what it means to me is that we feel really good in here about what we do. And I'll just share one example. I remember a guy telling me, he said, I used to wake up every morning and I'd wonder, what could I kill today? He says, now I wake up every morning and I wonder, what you just think about that. That is a phenomenal difference in your thinking. Instead of trying to kill stuff, we're trying to make stuff live. That makes in here over time, it makes you a better person, I believe. Also, regeneration is way bigger than your farm. It's community. It's that healthier, nutrient-dense food. You're gonna, over time, if we were all regenerative, we would be reducing our tax bill. So this is a huge thing. All these little communities, especially when you get out west into Saskatchewan and western Manitoba, there's hundreds of communities that there's nothing left. And maybe we don't need them anymore. I'm not saying they all need to come back. But if we would have been practicing regenerative agriculture from the beginning, my hunch is a lot of them would still be there today. So there's a lot more to regeneration than just the soil. It's a huge, big circle. Okay. So I got a question for you. What type of a farmer are you? Regenerative one, sustainable one, or a regenerative one? Anybody want to answer? Soil particles apart. So we have space here. We need space for air to come in. We've got to get oxygen and nitrogen in here. We've got to let carbon dioxide out, carbon dioxide in. We've got to have place for roots to grow. We've got to have place for all of the microorganisms to live. All of those things. And when we till or we do other various things to it, we sort of break these springs, if you like, and we make these soil particles go tighter together, as I showed you in the last picture. We get that soil much tighter, more dense. So we gotta, in regenerative agriculture, we try to do things to make this soil carbon sponge work better. We try and make our soil less dense by some of the practices that we do. So we use our skills then of observation. We use things like smell, taste, look, listen. We look and we feel. It's really important. We've been trained as farmers to sit in a four-wheel drive tractor 14 feet above the soil, listening to the tunes as we go along. That's how we do our observational skills. In regenerative agriculture, we need to get down on the ground. We need to use that thing there called a shovel and dig holes once in a while. When we started this pilot project, Michael and myself, if I made an appointment with a farmer, he didn't have time to see me, I wouldn't make that appointment. I'd say, well, sorry, obviously I'm not going to make it. I wanted a couple of hours of his time. And we went to the fields and we actually dug holes. And we looked at what was happening under there. And I was absolutely astounded by how many farmers had never dug in their soil in their life. It just blew me away. Here you're paying $500,000 for a quarter section of land and you've never looked at it, how it functions. And in modern agriculture, we have forgot that this is absolutely critical how this stuff functions. And if we want to get off the chemical or reduce our chemical dependency on petroleum inputs, we need to start to make this biology work. And the only way we can make it work is start to get our observational skills going better and see if some of these practices that we're going to try are actually doing anything. Maybe this guy's full of crap up here. He doesn't know what he's talking about. You need to figure that out on your own farm. So this is really important stuff. And a lot of people will phone me up and say, well, how fast does it go? And I would say in general terms, the more footprints that you have in your field, the faster the regeneration process will go. When you start to get keen and start to wonder, well, I wonder what that did. And you go out and look in a week and see. And then you do something else and you say to yourself, I wonder what that did. And you go out, dig a little hole to see, or you wonder why that spot is so much better than that spot. So you go out and dig a little hole and see. That's when regeneration really starts to happen. So, the principles of regeneration. There's 6 of them. This one here, the first one, context, is man-made. All the rest of these are, if you go into a natural system, these are natural processes. They are not man-made in any way. So I'm going to go through each one of these, and then we will stop and see if there's any questions. So context then is, go ahead, there's 4 parts to the context. The first one is ecological. So you guys are, especially up in this part of the world, you have a kind of a unique niche because you have a huge lake right beside you, which changes your climate. Maybe your soil's up on top of a ridge, you know, you're into gravel, boulders, that kind of stuff. That's going to obviously have an ecological limitation on what you can do. Maybe you're down in a low area, you're dealing with salt and flooding and all those kind of things, so you might have issues there. We can't change that. We just have to recognize that's how it is. If you're in Meadow Lake, Saskatchewan, probably corn and soybeans maybe isn't the rotation you should be looking at. You know, so these are all ecological considerations we need to think about. So the second one is financial. You got $1 million in the bank, or you owe $1 million on your line of credit, and the banker phones you every week to wonder how things are going. That's going to totally change how you approach regeneration. You're not likely going to go out and spend $80 an acre in cover crops and do your whole farm in cover crops if you're tight for cash. That would not be a wise use of your money. So that's part of the whole context. The third one then is societal. And this is probably the most common one that I deal with, is I'll have a son and a dad, and the son's all gung-ho on regeneration, and the dad says, hey, sonny, you ain't doing that in my farm. And that causes issues. So we need to work that through, figure out how do we make that work. Or 3 brothers, one wants to do it, one doesn't. Or old grandma says, no bloody way, you aren't doing that in my farm, and she still owns a good chunk of it. You know, so these are all things that we need to work through. And the last one then is spiritual. We all have different beliefs. And that does have a factor in how we approach regenerative agriculture. Okay. So these are the man-made ones. So from now on, we're going into, into the natural processes. So if we start looking at a natural process, you will never find bare land. And you can see here this particular guy doing a nice job of seeding. You can see that land is totally covered in Armour. Armour, litter, various terms for it, doesn't really matter which one you use. The key is to keep that land covered all the time. One of the analogies that I like to use, if I took this arm and put it into a fire, first of all, I'd probably say some very nasty words before I passed out. Likely in a day or two, the doctor would chop it off because this arm will not function without skin. Skin is absolutely critical for the well-being of this organ. Keeps dirt out, pathogens out, keeps heat in, moisture in, all these various functions that skin provides. Well, think of Armour or litter exactly the same on our earth. If we don't have it, we have issues. Next one. So here's one of the issues we have. So this picture was taken last summer. I think it was late June. The air temperature, it was in the morning, so it wasn't real hot yet. Air temperature was 25 degrees. This is a laser thermometer here I'm holding in my hand as I take the picture. So the soil temperature at that moment was 55.1 degrees. So 30 degrees warmer than the air. 30 degrees. On the top right there is the picture of the litter, or a temperature of the litter. It was 52. So it's still pretty warm. And then I just took the litter. I just kind of did this with my finger, scraped it away, and took a picture of the took a temperature of the actual soil, and it was 34 degrees. So it's still warmer. It's 9 degrees warmer than the air, but considerably cooler than the bare soil. So what do you think happened to the moisture in the top 5 to 7 centimeters of this soil that day? Where did it go? In the air, right? It evaporated. And we all know it was dry last summer. Didn't matter where we were, over here or over where I live, it was damn dry everywhere. So I would suggest to you that it's a much more efficient use of water to have it go out through transpiration than it is through evaporation. And the easiest way to control that is to keep your land covered. Also, if you happen to get a really hard rain, guess what? This stuff here will soak up, break the force of the raindrops. It'll make that moisture go in. Whereas if it's all bare like this, guess what will happen? It'll run off. So keeping that land covered is the first principle of regenerative. We'll go to the next bit. So here's a picture I just talked a minute ago about water infiltration. So just really high-tech equipment. You need an old auger, 6-inch auger, cut it 6-inch long pieces, make 2 or 3 of them. Take a piece of board with you and a hammer, pound it into the ground so it's 1 inch or so, just so it's tightly sealed. And then you dump your bottle of water in there, time how many minutes or seconds it takes for that water to disappear. And just do that over time. Start to measure that on a regular basis, roughly in the same spots. You do it this spring, do it again next spring, kind of keep records of that and see what's happening on your own farm. And as I said, the average acre in Manitoba, according to Manitoba Agriculture, is 1 inch per hour. That's pretty dismal. I know of farmers that can put 30 inches an hour in. Why? They've been regenerating for a while, but it makes a big difference, huge difference. Okay, next one. So the second principle then is animal incorporation. And this part of the world that we live in, the soils, after the glaciers left, the soils formed under animals. There was continual movement of animals across the landscape from the beginning up until our ancestors came and started to use the plow. And so those animals did phenomenal things to create the kind of soil that we were used to. There was tugging. When animals graze, they pull, they lift stuff up, and they actually break the rootlets. So there's a huge release of sugar underneath, which stimulates regrowth. Animals, when they graze, the saliva contains thiamine and various other enzymes in there that stimulate growth. So these plants, they've evolved with grazing. It's an absolute natural process. They pick microorganisms up in one spot of the area and they transfer it to another spot. So they keep on continually spreading microorganisms around the area. So they make nutrients recycle really quickly. If you took a blade of grass or wheat straw or whatever it is and laid it on the surface of the land, it could probably take up to 1 year for that to recycle. I can put it through the cow's rumen, and I can recycle that in 3 days. So you speed up biological time by putting animals on your land. Now, many grain guys say, well, I don't have cows, don't ever want to have cows. Yep, that's fair. I agree with that. However, maybe there's a cow guy not far away that you can make a deal with or something. You grow a cover crop. You know, and I know there's lots of logistical issues in making that happen, but we need to think about it. Next one. So the other thing that this movement of cattle across the landscape does, so here's a picture. There's an electric fence running right there. So this picture was taken on the 16th of July. And on the right-hand side where that good Dodge truck is there, there's 60 days since the cattle were there. On the left-hand side, it hasn't been grazed yet. So on this side right here, it looks like there's a lot of material there, and there is, but there's absolutely zero photosynthesis happening here. Because all of these plants are mature. Once a plant is mature, it doesn't do anything anymore. It's done its growth cycle. So it's just sitting there. Whereas on this side, it's actively growing. So it's creating photosynthesis, it's sending sugars down into the roots, feeding microorganisms, doing all that kind of stuff. This side is doing absolutely nothing. This is just like summer fall. So I can run my cows across here, and I can get it looking like this 10 days after that. So I can greatly extend the amount of growth that I can get in a season by using planned grazing. Next one. So the third principle then is to keep it green longer. This seems pretty simple, but when we think about what we do in agriculture, most of the stuff we grow is green for 70 days of the year. From the time it comes up to once it's starting, like once the seeds are formed, it basically stops. It might take it another 20 days to dry down before you can harvest it, but it's no longer doing photosynthesis. In our part of the world, we have about 250 days of potential capture of sunshine. Usually January and February aren't really good at capturing photosynthesis here. So we have about 180 days there that if all we're doing is growing wheat or canola, it's about 180 days every year where you're not feeding your livestock below the soil. If we don't have green happening like that, creating the sugars, the photosynthates that leak down into the roots, those little creatures down there called microorganisms that we need to have functioning for us are not working. And I don't know about you guys, but if I don't get fed for 180 days, I get very grumpy and don't do much. And so we need to feed those guys all the time. So that's the reason for you'll hear talk about relay cropping, intercropping, cover cropping, all these different terms. And that's the whole idea of it, is trying to figure out how to keep it green longer. Winter crops are wonderful because as soon as the snow disappears now, they're going to be green. So we need to keep thinking about when we're planning what we're going to do, we have to think about how to keep that thing green. Yes, go. Okay. So how do we know it's working? How do we know we're feeding the bugs? So dig up some roots and have a look. So these three examples here, you notice that all of these roots are covered with soil. Look at that. Look at that one. So what's happening here is that the sugar is exuding out. So the plants are creating photosynthesis up here. The sugar goes down and the plants actually leak the sugar out. Seems extremely wasteful. Why would a plant work hard to create photosynthesis and then let it all leak into the soil? But what the plant is doing, it wants a synergistic relationship with the microbes underneath. And so it says, okay, guys, here's some sugar for you. I want some phosphorus or boron or copper or zinc or whatever. That's how we get our nutrient density. That's how we get food that is healthy. We have to have that symbiotic relationship between the roots, the microbes, and the soil. And when we dig up plants that look like this, we know that's happening. When you dig up plants and all of the roots are like this, I would suggest that it's not happening. So this is one of the tests that we do in the spring, to start digging plants up like that to see what's happening under there and see if we do have that exchange going on. Yeah, next one. So here's just another example of keeping it green longer. So here we are, probably, I forget the date of this one, but let's say it's 10th, 15th of September. You can see that when you look across that landscape, a little bit here, but basically almost as far as you can see, there is zero green. The microbes are not being fed. These microbes are all starving. Look at this field here. This is one of my regenerative farmers. Bright green yet. These microbes are happy. These are doing their stuff. So it's changing that thinking. How do we plan it out so we can make all these principles happen? Yep. So the next one then is minimize our disturbance. This one sometimes gets people to throw stuff at me, but that's okay. I can duck. And so notice the word is minimize. It doesn't say zero. It says minimize tillage, or disturbance is the word. And so disturbance can be tillage. If you're an continuous grazer, cows are in the same spot, that's just as evil. High rates of nitrogen fertilizer can be negative to this. Pesticides, monoculture. So these are all forms of disturbance that aren't necessarily good. So we want to attempt to minimize our disturbance as much as we possibly can. So you think about those bed springs under there holding that soil apart. We want to encourage that as much as we possibly can. So just another, tillage is the most common use. And so we're actually introducing oxygen into that soil when we till, which causes a really rapid oxidization of organic matter. So we get CO2 coming up. We destroy those bed springs I showed you. Fungi are especially sensitive to tillage. So mycorrhizal fungi are one of the key things that are really lacking in our soils. So we want to make sure that we can do everything we can to get the mycorrhizal fungi back into our soils. And so tillage is one of the things that's exceptionally evil to them. Okay, next one. So the last point then is diversity. So we think about what was here 150 years ago, and there was probably somewhere between 250 to 300 species on every single acre. And we came along, our forefathers came along with a plow, and they simplified it, and we got her down to one. Monoculture, that was the God we worship. We want one species only. So you just think about, you go from 300 to one, and think about the consequences for that, for soil health, for the life of the birds, the insects, everything else, and the ecosystem that's around us. And it's pretty significant. So here's just an example of a guy's trying oats and flax as two crops together, which is a step forward, but it's a long ways from 300. Next one. So when you look at root structures of different types of plants, and these guys all work together. So maybe there's certain things this plant can do that this plant can't. We used to think they competed, but what we're learning now is there's actually synergy between these complex groups of plants. And people are finding with cover crops, especially when you start to get 8 species or more, there gets to be real synergy between those plants. And last summer in the drought, we saw really great examples of that, where you'd have 2 or 3 different things and they'd be all withered up and look like crap. And you'd see a group of 8 or 10 or 15 different species that maybe didn't look really great, but they looked not that bad. And so they're sharing water, they're sharing resources, they're doing all kinds of things. So diversity is wonderful. So how we get it into our modern agriculture is a bit of a challenge, but understand the principle is important. Okay, next one. So just to recap, the principles are the context, which is man-made. Keep that root as green as long as possible. Diversity, armor on the surface, minimize our disturbance, and try and incorporate animals if you can. There's no numbers on these. There's not one is more important than the other. They're all equally important. Okay, so now, pretty well now. All right, so I'll just share then a couple of examples of different ideas about how guys are trying to incorporate regenerative agriculture. So this particular producer is trying something called paired rows. And so this picture was taken in June. This is oats. And the plan was he was going to go in here and seed 2 more rows. I think it was Italian ryegrass, a clover, an annual clover, and something else. I can't remember what it was. Being it was so dry, he decided not to do that. But that was the plan. And then he was going to harvest the oats for grain and then graze. That was the plan. Next. So we were kind of curious to see, well, did those paired rows do anything? So on the left-hand side there, as you can see, the 2 root balls that we dug up, you know, 1 from each side. And to me, it looked like the paired rows have more root mass than the solid seed. Now, that's very, very subjective. There's no science to this at all. But just digging it up in one spot, taking a picture, to me, it looks like there is more. So whether there's something to having those paired rows, I don't know. Next one. So here we have a fellow that's doing interseeding in sunflowers. So you can see the sunflowers here. This is about mid-October, I believe this picture was taken. Just sunflowers aren't quite dry yet. But he'd sowed 7 species here in the row. One of them is flax. There's buckwheat there that's long since froze out. There was intermediate wheatgrass. And I don't actually remember what all the other ones are. But the whole idea that was to keep feeding those microbes longer. And, you know, they're down in there. You can see they're not even up to my knees there where that picture is taken. But it's still green, you know, late, mid, I forget the date, but late. I know it was past the 15th of October. And here we still got stuff that's green down in there. Sunflowers aren't doing anything anymore. They're a 120-day crop. So this guy was attempting to make one of those principles work for him. Next one. So here we have a guy that's sowing wheat and flax. You can see here's a flax plant, a flax plant, a flax plant. The first thing I want you to notice in this picture, look at the beautiful litter. Armour between the rows. Totally covered. Doing a phenomenal job. So this particular producer he's cutting back his seeding rate of wheat. He's putting, I believe it's 10 pounds roughly somewhere in there of flax, 15 pounds, I forget the exact number. And what he's finding is that he's getting equal yields to his monoculture wheat. So if you say going 40 bushels of wheat, he's getting 40 bushels on this. Plus he's getting 5 bushels of flax to boot. Now he's got the job of separating now, but I think you guys can all figure out the math on that really quick. You can grow the same amount of wheat as you did in monoculture, plus get 5 bushels of flax to boot, and he's paying for the flax with less wheat seeding rate. You know, your only additional cost is separating. So to me, it's a no-brainer. Next one. Here we have a guy harvesting corn. This was grain corn. It was being harvested. It was a little over 100 bushel an acre crop. And this is hairy vetch here, what you see that he's pulling up. There was 9 tons of biomass there. We did some measuring. And he ended up getting 180 cow days an acre. So he grew 100 bushels or 105, I forget the number, of corn. So that was reasonably profitable. That was 19. That was the year it froze on early September, so it hurt the corn yield a little bit. But at 180 cow days, I don't know what you guys figure a cow day is worth in the winter, but I figure it's at least $250. That's another $400 or $500 an acre that made. Regenerative agriculture gets really profitable really quick. Plus, he's building his soil health by doing this. It's still green. This is likely early November. I forget the date. Look at that. It's still green. The hairy vetch is still capturing sunlight. Next one. Maybe that's it. Oh, there it is. That's what it looked like after it was grazed. You can see how the cows took that hairy vetch right out. So here's just another example using winter annuals. So this particular producer planted a cover crop the year before for silage or for hay or for grazing. I don't even remember what they did, but they also had winter annuals in that mix. So this is year 2, no seeding, this is what it came back like year 2. So there's hairy vegetal triticale and sweet clover. So they got either a grazing possibility, this is taken about mid-June, I think, a possibility of a graze or a hay or whatever, silage, whatever they want to do. No cost, zero cost on that one. That becomes profitable. I think maybe that's it. Oh no, here's one more. Polycrop. So here we have a diverse mix again. There's all kinds of, I think there was 13 or 14 different species in there. You know, it's just doing phenomenal things. Is that it? No, I think. Try one more. That's it. Yeah. Okay. I think it's, yeah. Okay. That's all I got for you, folks. If anybody has any questions, I will attempt to answer them. If nobody has any questions, I will say thank you very much.